Hello and welcome to the Lakeshore Records podcast, On Cue With. Today I had the enormous pleasure of speaking with the great Michael Abels, an incredible composer, thinker, and teacher who you've heard on iconic scores such as Get Out, Us, Bad Education, and Alon v. Farrow. We covered a lot of ground, including how Michael found his voice as a composer in multiple genres, his fascinating collaborative process with the great Jordan Peele, gospel horror music and capturing the sound of the African-American voice, how Get Out changed the world forever, scoring for documentary versus film, the nexus of Woody Allen, Gershwin, Mia Farrow, and the sweeping sound of New York, the concept of sonic empathy, Michael's work with the Composers Diversity Collective, the job of a composer as a quote-unquote musical architect, and much, much more. Michael's phenomenal score for Alon v. Farrow is out now worldwide via Lakeshore Records. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Michael Abels as much as I did. Hello, Michael. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to talk about Alon v. Farrow. We're going to jump into that shortly. But first, if you don't mind, I'd love for you to give me a little bit of your background. What got music into you? Tell me a little bit about where you grew up and your first foray into composition.
Well, first of all, Alon, thanks very much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. Let's see. I feel like music was always in me. My earliest memories, I think, are of music. As a baby, I reacted viscerally to music. I began piano lessons at an early age. When I was 3, I thought that I could play the piano, but I noticed that the sounds were different than the songs that I was hearing. And so I asked my grandmother, why does it sound different? She says, we have to take lessons. I said, well, that was for me. So at age 4, I guess, I started piano lessons. I sang in the Phoenix Boys Choir as a youth, and that's where I learned about singing and about performing in a group and about musical excellence, regardless of your age. And I was always interested in how music worked. I thought it was so interesting that somebody made up this stuff. And I thought, how do they do that? And I want to try to do that. And I was writing beginning at age 8, and I couldn't figure out how to make my idea work. By about 13, I sort of stuck with it and I finished something. And then I was hooked. I thought that was just the most wonderful creative puzzle that could both challenge your, the kind of intellectual part of your mind, but also express your emotion. And the two of them together just made it seem to be like it would be a lifelong thing that I could be passionate about forever.
And you said 13, you wrote your first piece. What type of piece was it?
Because I had this very, I was taking lessons in a very traditionally classical way. The first thing I wrote was a piece for piano and orchestra. Without any, I knew something about the piano. I knew nothing about the orchestra, but that never stops you as a youth, or it shouldn't. And I remember transposing the horn parts into the entirely wrong key, because I got my transposition backwards, which I can still do if I'm not careful. I'm forever dyslexic on whether this is I'm encoding or decoding, if you know what I mean. So, but anyway, you can tell I was a composer from right out of the gate.
And you also have a background in jazz, bluegrass, and blues, etc.
I love when people, so I told you from an early age, I was always fascinated about how that someone wrote this, right? And I was also fascinated by the different genres of music, because I learned from do, re, mi, from Rodgers and Hammerstein, that it's just one word for every note by mixing them up, and that's the DNA of music, or at least of Western music. So when I heard different genres, I thought, how can this be true? How can this music that sounds so different be the same? And I had that perspective from day one. And so I was always studying other styles of music and thinking, why does this sound the way it does? And I was and you never gain so much appreciation for a style of music than if you try to write in that style. And so I would write in these styles of music that I was fascinated by. And in so doing, I think I would learn about them in a way that you don't just from, studying them kind of from without having to be inside. So I wasn't trained in other styles of music as much as I was writing in those styles and trying to emulate I mean, when I would do pop music, it was Quincy Jones who inspired me most. He's such an amazing producer and who can create any genre of music along with whoever he's collaborating with. And that was kind of a model for me of how to do different genres of music. So
it's a bit of a double-edged sword though, right? When you're intrigued by multiple genres, how do you, as they say, find your voice? And I know you have a very interesting thing to say about this. I've seen in an interview you mentioned global warming in terms of your finding of your own voice. Would you mind just articulating some of that?
Sure. So, and thank you for mentioning this, because I actually think it's crucial to artists. So I love to write in different genres, and that's part of what every artist has to figure. You have to actually figure out, what am I good at? And it's deciding that you are an artist or have the soul of an artist is just step one. It's like you have a particular brand, and I tell young artists that, you may not know what your brand or your art is. And in fact, it's probably better if you don't, because that should be an exploration on your, you should look at that as a good thing. And so as I was learning about all the great music that had already been done, as I was studying music, I thought, well, what is it that makes me me? And it was, I thought, my ability and interest in different genres is a thing. And that may be hard to articulate to other people, but that's a thing. And that is my thing. I have to just go with it. So I wrote this piece called Global Warming, which at the time was not a politically charged thing. It was 1990. It was just about a scientific observation that scientists had, and no one was saying that it was untrue or anything. It just hadn't gotten the attention it had today. And so, but to me, I used that title as a pun, as a way to talk about similarities between music of different cultures that I was hearing, which was a cross-genre, intergenral, that's not a word, but you know what I mean, thing that I thought, hey, this is a great, not only am I interested in this idea, but it's also a thing I would be good at, So that was, I thought, you need to write music that expresses who you are, but also is a demonstration of what you're good at, which is hopefully the same thing. So in the piece of Global Warming was about an intersection of music of different cultures. And so in doing that, I managed to fully express myself, but also give people an idea of who I am as an artist. And that was kind of a benchmark for me in my artistic maturation.
Which I think you've managed to very, very brilliantly persist with in terms of your scores. I mean, it's, we're talking about orchestral music essentially, but then there's a transition into scoring to picture, which is a whole beast in and of itself. And the fact that you've been able to maintain such a diverse array of genres in all of your scores while scoring to pictures is very impressive to me. What sparked your transition into scoring?
Well, thank you very much. Your question makes it sound like it was this very organized plan, and a lot more about stumbling into things, or really it was, I consider all music to be storytelling, whether it's concert music or songwriting, or you pick the genre. To me, the essence is storytelling, and it's just about whether the story is one that the audience is asked to create in their minds based on their own reactions to the music, or whether it's one that's presented on a screen, or in a story that's very specific and being told to you. So to me, that was a natural thing for me to do, scoring to picture. But I did TV commercials when I was in college, and that was great experience, but I never had any traction in the industry. I'm one of those people who I feel like can't sell anything to anyone. And it seemed to me that success in doing that had relied a lot on one's ability to sell oneself. And I have never felt like that I was good at that. But Jordan Peele wasn't interested in that. He was listening for someone who could write in a 20th century orchestral concert style, very aggressive and edgy and avant-garde music, but also who understood the African-American experience. And so in that sense, he was kind of looking for me. So he made the producers of Get Out hunt me down and call me up. And so I got sent what was to become the Oscar-winning script of the following year. I got sent that just cold in the mail or on email, and I'd never seen or read anything like it. And so even before I met Jordan, I was already a yes. But then after meeting Jordan, I was clearly a yes. And I just thought, I'm doing this. I don't care. It seems like it'll turn out well, but even if it doesn't, it's the most amazing thing ever. So that's for me. Anyway.
That I was going to ask you. I mean, that you sort of telegraphed my next question. Was, you know, I was thinking you're probably one of the first people on earth to actually see Get Out or some iteration of it, right? As you're working on it. It sounds like you got the script first. How conscious were you, or did you know this project was going to change the world?
I don't think you can ever know that. I mean, Jordan says quite clearly that he didn't ever think the film was going to be made, even though if you look at the steps he took to get it made, he approached it with just the most logical, entertainment business acumen that you ever could. I mean, but I thought the film would be, I didn't know who would see it. I thought the film at its best would be very polarizing. And I just thought that, you have to come at any project you do from an artistic perspective, which is that I believe in this. I'm giving it everything that my talents and skills have to offer, and I just want to be able to be proud of it, regardless of what sort of audience it ends up having. And you just have to trust that, and that's where I think all of us working on it were coming from. Was like, we really thought it was a great thing, and we were super personally proud of it, but had no expectation. When the thing first, I was just happy. My only goal really was to have it be released. That the entire time I was working on it, I just wanted the film to be released and to be completed, And when it opened #1 at the box office, I was just floored.
Yeah, I mean, it changed the conversation. It changed the zeitgeist. I mean, it's one of those movies that there's a before and an after that's clearly defined by the landing of that movie. And your music for it, I mean, I can't imagine how many different approaches you could have taken in terms of subverting expectations. What were those conversations like about creating a score?
It was from the first conversation with Jordan. He said, I want the African-American experience both metaphorically and literally in this score. I mean, that's almost a direct quote. And we had a great conversation about what makes music scary. And we seemed to be pretty much aligned on that. But then when he talked about the African-American voice, well, he didn't say African-American experience. He said the African-American voice, both metaphorically and literally in the film. And he also mentioned about how he said, even so much Black music has this element of hope running through it. And I thought that was such an insightful thing to say. Just really, I never thought about that. But even the blues, there's an expectation underneath the sorrow and a hope, and he said, but you got to drain all the hope right out of it. That's why he brought that up. He said, that's the part he doesn't want. So I said, I think it sounds like what you're talking about is gospel horror. And he said, yeah. And neither of us knew what that would sound like, but we liked that concept. So out of that, I wrote a couple demos, and one of them was Sikilisa Kwawahenga, which became the main title of the movie. And so beyond that, the other aesthetic thing was that it's not really a horror movie. It's a thriller. To me, it's a suspense thriller. And so I was very much thinking of Bernard Herrmann and classic Hitchcock, because every word in the Get Out script it's a very tightly written script that every part of it is leading up to what it reveals and why. And so the score needed to say, I think, this is a movie. This movie may have had a small budget, but this is a big movie. This is actually a classic movie. This is a movie that has a lot to say and will be studied. And so a score can say so much about a film that isn't said in words. And so the score needed to have a certain classic movie elegance to it. And that ended up being a lot of how the harmonies I chose and the harp and the strings, that's what it's communicating in the background of its foreshadowing of what's to come.
What are the lyrics? What do they mean?
Oh, so they're in Swahili because they're supposed to be the voices of departed slaves and or departed, victims of social injustice, lynching victims and things. But they're ghosts, and so ghosts don't speak to us in English. They speak to us in dreams and metaphors and things. And so Swahili wasn't, I guess, the most predominant slave language I discovered, but it's a very musical language, and I needed some artistic license. So that's my license. But the words mean it's brother, because that word needs no translation in any language. Brother, kimbia, which means run. Sikiliza kwa wahenga, listen to the ancestors. Una kimbia mbali, run far away. Brother, kimbia kuwa mwenyewe, which means save yourself.
It's a warning. It's
absolutely. What they're doing is they're telling Chris, the main character, they're telling him, get out.
Yeah.
Get out is a figure of speech. It wouldn't translate in Swahili, so I was forced to not use those words literally. But that's what they're saying.
Very interesting. I'm gonna have to return to that now that I can fully understand the context. That's really interesting. You have this through line. I'm wondering if it's at all intentional. From Get Out to Us to Alon v. Farrow, there's a play of identity in a lot of these projects where there's who you are, then with us, there's literal doppelgangers, and there's how you're perceived to be. Same as Alon v. Farrow. I'm wondering if that's something you're conscious of, or if it's just something I'm noticing.
I think you're absolutely right when you point it out that way. Like that is true. It hasn't been fully conscious. I mean, what I have noticed is that I'm a mixed race person of many of some conflicting backgrounds, or what we would find to be conflicting from some traditional viewpoint, and people who are mixed in some way in their lives, whether that's ethnically or geographically or whatever. You have some code switching going on where you're sometimes of one world and sometimes of another. And you learn to make your peace with that, not to have that be an uncomfortable thing, but you just become comfortable, and then that's how the world works. And so because of that, maybe I feel at home in that sort of dichotomy or juxtaposition. But it's hard for me to say which one came first, because so natural to me. So I don't know if I would like to think I feel comfortable without that being a thematic thing, but I really have not thought of it that way before. So thank you for that. That's it.
Sure. Alon v. Farrow is very, in terms of identity and narrative and the sort of suspense of it all. I mean, you're also dealing with something that's happened in real people's lives, and then there's translating it to a screen. There's a lot. It's very rich and complex. How did you arrive at this project?
Well, so I was asked by the directors, Kirby Dick and Amy Ziering, to score it, and they're very passionate, and I think they do wonderful work. They did On the Record and a number of other documentaries prior to that. And so their take on, I remember when this story of Alon versus Farrow was, front page news and in a very tabloidy way in the 90s, and to see it revisited after the Me Too movement, and to see all of that with a perspective of the 21st century was fascinating to me. I mean, I was legitimately fascinated in, I watched the whole thing before I scored it, and I was just found it just so interesting. So that was my primary interest. The secondary one was that it gave me a chance to do this thing that I do well. It leads back to what we were talking about before, where there are moments of first, there's a lot. It's a documentary, so there's a lot of talking and a lot of facts and a lot of people with degrees telling us important information. And during that, the music has to give you a sense of forward motion to know that you're not just in a college lecture, that you're being given this information for a reason. So there's that component of music in it. Then there's a component of music where you hear a little girl talk about her experience of something so intimate that shouldn't be, just this tragic, really horrific thing. And yet it's reality. It's not a made up story like Get Out. So you have to score that in a way that's very respectful of the emotion that's already there, and not lead the audience in any way, but simply honor the emotion that's already created. And then there's so that's another genre of music. And then there's a third genre, which is, it actually begins as a love story and as like a really big Hollywood romance between two famous people in New York, the greatest city in the world, And so, and Woody Allen, what is absolutely, he typifies or helped make that image of New York that we think of in the late 20th century. His films just epitomize what that is. And so there was an opportunity in moments where we're harking back to what that would be like for him to be dating Mia and having met her for the first time. There's a need for the music to be very romantic and old-fashioned in a sort of Gershwin-y sense, old-fashioned New York in the mid-20th century. So that was a whole nother genre of music. So there are these three different needs for the music in the score, and I think the piece needed a composer who could do all three of those things and then also make them feel like they belong together. So those were my challenges, and I thought, oh, these are great. This is a job for me. I'm at home with this sort of world.
Yeah, I have to re-emphasize and just say, I think you really nailed it. There's a sense of like driving urgency throughout.
Great.
Which is, the stakes are high. Let's be real, right? So, and you draw from so many different musical genres. It's a fascinating listen, start to finish, the album itself, because you touch upon so much. I mean, with, you have that beautiful melody in Falling in Love with the Movie Star, as you said, Gershwin. It's very sweeping, and you're almost knowing the story, as I assume most people who watch this know. There's a bit of a trick that happens. You're sort of enveloped, or you're drawn into this charisma and this beautiful energy of their story and your music, and then
then things happen.
Yeah. And I think you really handled it incredibly well. I think it feels like it would have been very tricky.
Well, the filmmakers, they were really good about. I was the new guy, I actually, the first time I ever met Kirby and Amy, I said, what are the differences between scoring for documentaries versus film? Because I didn't want to go in thinking I knew the answer to that.
Yeah, sure.
Because I hadn't done it. And they were certainly able to give me the perspective of what it is they do, because they're experts at it. And they care very much about editorializing. And I mean, they think about that with every single shot choice they make, about whether something's journalistic or has a point of view, and whether when it has a point of view, or when they allow a point of view to be articulated, how and why, and whether that serves the project. And so I didn't always because they're so conscious about it, I didn't have to take that on as my primary focus. but they would, you know, all the cues are subject to their approval, and they were very conscious of whether the music went too far in an emotion or was leading the audience or things like that. So there was a lot of that in making choices. But then also, you have to ultimately, I feel like when I'm scoring to picture, I do it as an audience, sort of as I'm coming from my genuine emotion of watching as an audience member, but I'm also coming from just like the actors are so great at depicting characters. Mm-hmm. I want to be a musical actor. I want the emotion of the music to be as genuine as what you see on the screen. In the case of a documentary, you are seeing genuine emotions. It's not an actor; it's a real person. When mm-hmm. Dylan says what she experienced, you can tell that that's her experience, and she's being truthful. And so, I just try to empathize and then write music that expresses that empathy for whoever the character is on screen, even if they're a talking head. You know, they're mm-hmm. coming from a point of view, and the point of the music is to help the audience understand, you know, what the person's trying to communicate, whether they're someone with a PhD who's reporting what they observed, or a little girl who is, you know, coming forward with something that happened.
That's fascinating. I'm gonna make a note. Sonic empathy. That's I like that. I'm very conscious of the time. I'm gonna just throw out some rapid fire questions if you don't mind. I know we've got only a couple minutes left. The Composers Diversity Collective. Can you tell us a little bit about that project and the mission behind it?
Yes. So I'm a co-founder of the Composers Diversity Collective, which is a nonprofit which has the mission of increasing visibility of composers of color in the entertainment industry. And since, as you mentioned, since Get Out and some other films that came out, you know, Crazy Rich Asians and Coco and Black Panther. I mean, Hollywood has seen that diversity can be very good for the box office when it's done, when it's embraced and flaunted, you know? And so now in the industry, most people I think are saying, we understand that inclusion is not only good for the soul, but good for our pocketbooks. And we want it, but it used to be people would say, but we don't know anybody, you know, but now they say, and we know people, but they're working. And so we still don't have anybody we can call. So the Composers Diversity Collective is there to say, hey, over here, let us fill up your contact list with lots of composers from every part of the planet and ethnicity and gender, and let us help you demonstrate that inclusion is good for the soul and for the box office. So great.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And it sounds like it's an immediate filter that someone can go to for just great artists.
A wonderful website at composersdiversitycollective.org. So I encourage everyone who is looking for diverse voices to go there and check us out.
2 final questions quickly, if you don't mind. Do you have a dream project in mind?
Oh gosh, I tell people these days that I have the coolest problems. That's how I describe my life. I wrote a evening-long piece for the Kronos Quartet and Choir that's going to be premiering in November, called "At War with Ourselves," and that was definitely a passion project. I have co-written an opera with Rhiannon Giddens, who's this amazing roots and I guess roots music artist is her category she's been placed in, but she's an amazing storyteller and singer and banjo player, and you know, she falls under the country, the very broad country genre, but she is helping reclaim our history in a way that also involves her amazing songwriting. So that opens next year in May at the Spoleto USA Festival, and I just feel really blessed I hope to keep contributing in all these different genres as people continue to offer me the opportunity to do so.
Those two just sound so different and so cool in different ways. Yeah.
And I didn't even notice, I didn't even mention any films. Yeah. Those are also coming, and they're challenging me to do what I do. So
great.
I'm so happy.
Yeah. I can't wait to see you do space. Um,
I'm looking forward to that. Absolutely. I really am.
Last question. It's just a thought experiment. I'm not particularly religious, but it's good to have parameters. You get to, can be the pearly gates or purgatory, can be wherever you want. You're placed before, could be God, your judges, whomever it might be. You get to play one song. What is it?
Oh my gosh. One song before God? Wow, what a setup question. Huh, should I even play along with this?
You don't have to. You answer it however you please.
I really think that, well, I love your question's unfair, but I also, I love your question because it goes to what is fair, I think. It's like, what your question is like, what as an artist do you want to be remembered for, is what your question is.
Yeah.
And so I get that out of when I see people performing my music and I see the joy that it gives them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And when I hear it, I mean, I write music, even the most horrible music that Jordan Peele and other people forced me to write. This horrible music. Music is written for, I play the piano some, I play the piano, but I'm not a performer. I just make blueprints of music. I'm like an architect that, architects, unless they're, but architects in the purest art form, they just make blueprints of what a building would look like if you were going to make a building. Mm-hmm. Okay? And the people who make the building, like the musicians, are the people who take my blueprints and make them the thing that they're supposed to be. And those musicians bring their souls and their lives and their interest to that music. And so I write music that I want musicians to enjoy playing. And I talk to young composers about how, music can be really hard. Musicians want to be challenged, but if it doesn't sound like it's hard, it's a waste of time, because nobody wants to do something that's really hard and have people go, okay, very nice. Like that has to create an impression. And so it's intrinsic to music. So therefore, I would go to the pearly gates and I would show whoever examples of musicians enjoying and really, taking music I've written and taking it to the highest level. Because I think as a composer, that's what you're meant to do.
Yeah, they're breathing life into it. Thank you so much, Michael. I could talk to you for hours. I find you to be very fascinating in your whole approach. I mean, there's no one quite like you, and I thank you for everything that you've done. Well, hopefully we'll speak soon.
Hopefully. This has been a total pleasure. Thank you so much, Alon.